All right, kids. So today we're going to talk about propaganda and how it works and how we can find it. So we talked about Raven, how it is that we really dig into the credibility of a source. When a source is sort of ostensibly scholarly, how do we parse apart how credible it is? And then we sort of segued into these pieces that maybe aren't ostensibly scholarly. So we talked about fake news, and we talked about how fake news works and how fake news is created, and how we can sometimes fall for fake news. And then today we're going to talk about propaganda, which isn't necessarily fake news. It's just really, really, really spun news. So sort of the first piece here is, what is propaganda? Well, the sort of dictionary says that it's this biased or misleading information that is used specifically to promote or publicize some cause, some point of view, some political candidate. It's not necessarily a lie, but it is a spun truth, or a spun version of the truth that is deeply biased and intentionally misleading. And sort of the whole point of it is to mislead and is to convey this kind of bias out there. So, if we think about, propaganda as the sort of puppet master and the people it is trying to convince as the sort of puppets, right? It uses sort of four really big tools: simplification, exploitation, exaggeration, and division. Most propaganda uses all four, but they certainly use at least two of these pieces. So what is simplification? Simplification is basically taking some deeply complicated issue like war or crime or COVID-19 or elections or whatever, some like deeply, deeply complicated issue with many layers and many sides, and it just boils it down to something that seems very, very simple. And so a lot of times extremes will make something seem more simple. So if we say, well, this war was caused by people not paying their taxes, right? Well, of course, there's 1,000 other things that went into that, right? There's 1,000 other pieces. Maybe that's true. Maybe part of what caused the war is people not paying their taxes, but there's also 800 other complicated, tiny pieces and causes. But when we use these extremes and we lean on it's just this way, that's simplification. Sometimes people will make leaps of logic. You hear about the slippery slope fallacy. So, my favorite example is, talking about drug addiction. It says, well, when you're a teenager, somebody might offer you a sip of a beer, and then that sip of a beer encourages you to have a cigarette, and before you know it, you're having a pack of cigarettes a day, and then, where you buy your cigarettes also sells marijuana, and then all of a sudden you're addicted to marijuana, and then once you're addicted to marijuana, it's just a minute before you're addicted to everything else, and then before you know it, you're 22 and you're overdosing of heroin, right? So these are these huge leaps of logic where it's like, well, if you have a sip of beer as a teenager, by the time you're 22, you're going to have overdosed. And it's this, you'll hear this often as people talk about things, very complicated issues like drug addiction and drug enforcement, and they make these huge leaps of logic that do that. They might present incomplete facts. So you hear this in every political debate or discussion right now about COVID-19. So you'll hear, President Trump might say one fact or statistic, and then Vice President Biden might say some other fact or statistic, and then the CDC provides this fact or statistic, and Governor Wolf provides this fact or statistic, and Ms. Spielbauer, Superintendent Spielbauer at Carlisle School District presents that fact or statistic, and all of those facts and statistics are real facts probably, but when we see propaganda, it's people picking and choosing which facts they convey. So if we have somebody who wants to present COVID-19 as either less harmful than it is, less scary than it is, less deadly than it is, you might see people presenting incomplete facts. So they'll present some information but without the context of other information. And then setting up and knocking down easy targets, sort of straw man. So, we can say, well, obviously we shouldn't do this, and sort of set up a target that's very, very, very easy to prove to be ridiculous. Well, obviously we should all be learning remotely this year because of COVID-19, because if we go to school in person, then the germs are just everywhere, and students won't wear masks, and then we're killing kids, right? So we set up this target that's like, oh wow, okay, we really can't can't fight that battle, we can't fight that argument, and so we set that target up. Exploitation. So propaganda is really focused on making you feel emotions rather than discussing facts. So this is really important because you have to think, especially when we're talking about political candidates, because we're coming up on an election here. But anytime that, political candidates tend to be the ones using propaganda, political candidates and media who are covering political candidates. And you have to think about, is this candidate or is this newspaper article trying to tell me information, or is this candidate or is this newspaper trying to make me feel something? And it's not that every time they're trying to make you feel something, it's bad, right? But it should be a little bit of a flag to you that if they are leaning on emotions, they are not probably leaning as much on facts. And when a political candidate or an article or a piece of media in some way can make you feel something very strongly, our feelings are not always rational. And so they can sort of sway the way that we think and the way that we act. So this idea of fear-mongering, okay, so Hitler was very famous for this in World War II, that, he made people feel afraid of Jewish people and of economic collapse. And so even though there really was no factual basis there, even though there was no real true information, people were so afraid that they were able to kind of separate themselves from their logical understanding of how the world works. Sometimes propaganda will use flattery. So, you guys, you supporters of me, you're the smartest people in the world. You guys are obviously doing it right. Those other guys, they're crazy. But you guys are the ones who are doing it right. You see this all the time in targeted ads to certain groups or certain professions. Sometimes you'll see shocking content, really graphic pictures, graphic images, often misleading in certain ways, those graphic images. But again, they're things that are designed to make you feel something. And then this is really big: deadlines, peer pressure, ultimatums. So one of the great examples that combines exploitation with simplification is often when a country is in a position of war or deep military conflict with another country. The leader of that country will say, well, you're either with us or you're with the enemy. You're either on our side or you're on the terrorists' side. And so it sort of sets you up here with this ultimatum of like, well, shoot, I'm not sure I really love the way our government is handling this battle, but I'm definitely not with the terrorists. I'm definitely not with those guys who are bombing our houses. And so you're sort of exploited into choosing a side there. Sometimes there will be deadlines, right? You all need to either decide to come on board and be part of this by Friday or not, okay? Exaggeration. So this, again, is just going to really just make everything seem bigger and more compelling. So a lot of times when you know what exaggeration is, but you'll see people promising outlandish outcomes. So if somebody who's running for office says, well, I will, I'll be let's use school president, student council president as an example here, okay? So if somebody's running for student council president, they say, I will become president of the student council, and there will be vending machines, candy vending machines in every classroom, and we will have cupcakes for breakfast, and homework will be canceled, right? These are outlandish outcomes, right? We're exaggerating what we're capable of. Sometimes they'll piggyback on other successes. So look at what I've done in this issue. Now I will do that in every other arena as well, okay? Rather than being sort of humble about the things that have gone well, exaggeration propaganda will really hype success stories. And often they'll make power plays, right? I am the strongest. I am the most powerful. No one can stand against me. No one can fight against me. And that's sort of that exaggeration piece. And then lastly, division. This is really important. Propaganda is always trying to create an us and a them. So it's there to broaden that gap between the us, the supporters of whoever is disseminating the propaganda, and the them, whoever that other side is, okay? And they'll do this by creating heroes and villains, right? I am the hero, you are my followers, we are warriors of justice, and those guys who oppose us are un-American. They're unpatriotic, okay? Or we are the heroes, and those, the other side, are evil and want people to die, right? As we broaden this gap between people. This kind of connects back to what I was saying before with the ultimatums issue. So that sort of, you're either with us or you're with the terrorists. You either support our military action or you want the terrorists to win, and sort of assuming that there are only two sides and that these issues have a sort of clear black and white division. Often the propaganda will try to liken itself to other things that are comfortable and familiar. So religion is often something that fits this category. That we know that in America, for example, Christianity is a very, very common religion. Many Americans are Christians. So American propaganda will often try to appeal to Christian values, Christian images, Christian parables, Christian stories, because we know that many American people are so comfortable and familiar with that. Or they'll do the same thing with Christmas, or they'll do it with Thanksgiving, or with holidays, or things that we cherish, that we love. Basketball, baseball, sports, these kinds of things that we know are comfortable, that people are connected to, and we'll say, well, if you're with me and you're with baseball and you're with, these things that you love, you could never support this other thing, and you've got to follow me and my ways. Obviously, stereotypes and name calling are always going to be divisive. If we say this guy's stupid and I'm smart, not to be political at all, right? But Donald Trump is often giving names to nicknames to people, and that's designed to be divisive, okay? That, when we talk about nicknames that are dedicated, we call them Sleepy Joe or whatever, those are divisive sort of name-calling techniques. And then this word othering means when you take anybody, any group of people, so this could be racial, this could be gender, this could be a political party, and we capital O other them, and we show we are this way, we are normal, we are this way, and this other group, they're other, they're weird, they're different, and they're distinctly separate from us. So all of this connects to this bigger picture of what propaganda is and how it works. So what I want you to do is to go back to that historical piece that you evaluated at the beginning of class, and think about how does that historical piece use these 4 techniques that we just talked about, and really thinking about this could not be more relevant. We're talking about historical propaganda, but you are seeing propaganda from every political party, from every political candidate right now that is using these techniques, and I'd love you to be aware of them. So that's your task. Enjoy and good luck.